so welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Emerging Leaders Collaborative. We're delighted to have you here and thank you so much for making the time to join us today. I want to start with a custom in Australia, which is by acknowledging that I am on the traditional lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people and pay respect to their custodianship and stewardship of this land, sea and sky for many, many years before the arrival of colonisers in our land. And I want to extend that same respect to any First Nations people with us today and to First Nations people wherever it is that you live, love and work. I also want to acknowledge the power of people who work from lived experience. We're joined by many people with lived experience on the call today and want to acknowledge the strength and resilience of those who work from their lived experience to improve systems and structures for everyone. So we have lots of different countries joining the Emerging Leaders Collaborative. I had a count yesterday. We have 11 different countries and still growing. And we've got a really beautiful combination of lived, living and learned experience in the collaborative. With that, sometimes comes some differences in languages. So I just want to acknowledge and note that the good or preferred language is different in different places, whether it's identity first or person first. And so in these meetings, we use the principle of charity. So we interpret people, what people say with the kindest or the best possible explanation. We try to understand ideas before we disregard them or get too caught up in how they're expressed. Throughout the meeting, there are notes available here. I'm just going to put a link in the chat. So if you need a bit of guidance about what we're doing, please feel free to jump onto the site there. And I really want to come back to the purpose of this group. So the purpose of convening and creating the Emerging Leaders Collaborative, we know that people are committed to inclusive and collective leadership and want to do intergenerational collaboration and knowledge sharing and work in line with the Emerging Leaders principles that we co-created with members all around the world. And so this group is really about how do we make that real? So we're really focused on some practical action, accountability, problem solving and opportunity identification by coming here today. And we'll try and balance through our collaborative the need to create space for learning and sharing skills and information and also connection, because that's a big thing that we've heard. People want to connect with people who are also keen on this work. And finally, when we were developing the collaborative, one of the things that we were told was really important to people was to have some really clear rules of the road. And so when we think that that's something that will just really help people understand the behaviour and the values that we think will make this a constructive space. So the summary of that is available on the site, and you can jump on the link if you'd like to have a look at them. But the rules of the road effectively really set out how we relate to each other. So we think that everybody's equal and that they should be able to make decisions about their own lives. We think that everybody can be a leader, and a leader is anyone who gets other people to work together towards the same goal. We think that everyone can have a special place to lead and help others in a way that they're good at. And we call this a leadership niche. We're kind to each other. We don't judge each other. We think it's okay to have different ideas and share those ideas respectfully. We talk about the things that we agree to talk about during our meeting time, which is why I've outlined the purpose of the space, and that helps everyone to stay focused. But if we do want to talk about something else, that's totally cool. We make some time after the meeting. And if people make a mistake or they forget some rule of the road, we tell them kindly. We think it's okay to make mistakes and that everyone makes mistakes sometimes. And if I make a mistake or if somebody lets me know that I make a mistake, I listen and I try and stick with the rules of the road next time. So that's our outline of the session today and an introduction to the space. For those of you who've been to double IDL, double IMHL events before, you'll know we really like to spend some time in introductions. I'm just going to actually set you up with breakout rooms to start with, so that you get a chance to have a chat with each other and get to know some of the other people around the room. And I'll give you 5 minutes for that and then call you back. So we'd love you to just start with your name, where you are, and a little bit of a fun icebreaker question, which is, what's your favorite flower or plant? Just something to get the conversation started. I'll open those breakout rooms now. And see you in 5 minutes. I'm going to welcome Ruby Moore. Thank you so much, Ruby, for stepping in at short notice. Unfortunately, Michael's had a double booking that's prevented him from joining us, and you've stepped in to join us at very short notice. So thank you so much. You've been such a champion and an ally through the development of the Emerging Leaders work. So would you like to introduce yourself to the group? Tell us a bit about who you are, and then we'd love to jump into a conversation about leadership.
Hey, thanks, Aisling, and apologies, everybody. I was at the sponsoring countries leadership group meeting for disability for our organization here, our network, and then realized that, Aisling said, well, Michael's not coming, get here. So who's in charge here. It's Aisling. So I run a protection and advocacy system here in the US. Our highest priority is protecting people from abuse and neglect and preventable deaths, and then supporting people to have good lives, maintain and restore their rights, and have as much autonomy as possible in their lives. So it's been a 47-year journey for me, so I'm clearly not young, although I think I'm still emerging. I love the work that Aisling's done and led around emerging leaders, and I apologize if that's not a term that you like being called, because I think we're all emerging until we're dead. So that's where you go. I'm on the IAMHL IIDL board, and I'm the co-chair of the IIDL US steering committee. So those are those little things. But in my life, I have 5 generations of family members with disabilities, and have spent my entire adult life, honestly, bringing people out of exile. And my great love is figuring out what people's core gifts are, and then really lifting that up and helping people launch careers and businesses, and just surround themselves with people who are good mirrors and reflect back who you really are. So one of my great joys has been getting to know Aisling, and to getting to know the work of this group, and being part of kind of developing the principles that I think not only apply to emerging leaders and the work we're doing here, but also to just being a human being. And then just finally, I'll just say that I actually think that some of the best breakthrough work that's happened in this global network has happened when young and disabled leaders and Indigenous leaders and Indigenous youth, all the various ways people are considered emerging. I think emerging is sometimes we don't know you yet. It's not that you're emerging so much as we haven't recognized you yet. But when people have come to the global network events and then just change the entire dynamic. And so I think this is like, we always say, the cool kids table. This is like the place to be. This is the crucible innovation and cool change, and deeper reflections on what really matters if we're living in this world and we're picturing the world we want it to be. I think that this is the group. So thank you for inviting me to be part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ruby. And what a beautiful place to start, because the first question that we wanted to talk through was really, actually, why is it important that we maintain but also expand leadership within inclusion and rights-based movements like disabilities, mental health, and addictions or substance use? Why is it important to keep widening the table?
Oh my gosh, as John Lennon would say, every one of us is all we need. You know, part of the work that I've done over the last several decades is around citizen advocacy, and it's where one person who has the experience of disability or trauma, mental health trauma, or other kinds of experiences that lead to social devaluation and people not really seeing who the person really is. We always say, like, the answer to what should we do is who else needs to be involved, and the answer is literally everybody. But I always think particularly people who are at risk of not being seen and understood for who we are, and whose insights are badly needed in order to sort out not just the problems, but also opportunities.
I know some things that could help the police.
Is somebody trying to say something and it's popping in? Okay,
I think that was background. All good.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anybody's kids or neighbors, or somebody passing by. But sometimes I'm very deeply aware of people who use augmentative and alternative communications systems, and sometimes people are trying to encode a message and out it pops, and other times they're trying to put some notes together and out it pops. So I just wanted to make sure we're hearing everybody, however you're coming into the conversation. So yeah, we just start off with that. In the United States, I've worked in pretty much every jurisdiction here, figuring how we can kind of lift the veil and help people to be seen for who we really are, because the fact is, people would not be abused and neglected if people were seen for who we really are. When you other people, when people are seen as the other, that's when all kinds of things happen that you would never do to a person that you care about. And so the more people who are part of the conversation, just on sheer incidents of disability and trauma alone, that almost everybody in the room, or maybe everybody in the room, honestly, either has or is about to have a disability or eventually have a disability, or almost all of us have experienced trauma, some, more dramatically than others. And so the more we have a collective of a good representation of everybody from our community having the conversation. And I also think, a lot of times, like in disability, one of the ways that even the most knowledgeable so-called expert, kind of shoot ourselves in the feet on trying to figure out problems is that we figure out some way to carve out a special place, which, it's kind of like in mental health parity. It's like, no, health parity is good. Health is good, but mental health parity has to be over here in a separate. Well, as soon as you do that, you've unwittingly contributed to that whole notion of us and them, which is really the thing we're trying to deconstruct. And so if you're welcoming everybody into the space and listening deeply, with your heart, and being open to the possibility as a curious learner that you might hear something wildly different than anything you've considered before, the experts in front of you, I have this thought I heard this quote, decades ago, but somebody said, hey, when the student is ready, the teacher emerges. And I always thought it meant, when you need people, God puts them in front of you, which, probably is true. But I think it also means like your teachers are all around you. And as soon as you understand that, when you're ready to understand that, there are the people and there are the answers. They've been in front of you all along. So I think the only way we ultimately change the things that have been harmful and dangerous to people who've been, socially devalued through no fault of their own, just through a profound misunderstanding about who they are, what people have to contribute, is to be open to hearing from people directly, like what matters.
Yeah, so Ruby, you're really speaking to that idea that we've embedded within the emerging leaders work of collective leadership. And I'm curious to know what you think looks a bit different. If we think some like leadership programs, for example, leadership development programs often focus on the individual and sort of developing here's how you do active listening, and here's how you think strategically, and here's how you lead people or influence people, those sorts of things. So how does that look different if we stop thinking about we have to develop individuals into leaders and think about we need to develop a collective of leadership? What do we do differently? How does that look different practically, do you think?
Yeah, I think that builds on the wisdom of like asset-based community development, recognizing that the gifts and capacities of any particular community, and that community could be defined as a very small place or a very large, jurisdiction. But when you think about the gifts and capacities of a community, then you have everything you need. And the discovery journey is really about mining for those gifts and recognizing them when you see them, even in unexpected places. It turns out that we weren't created to do it by ourselves. That was never the idea. And so while developing individual people to find their gifts and talents and their leadership, capabilities is terrific, when you turn to each other, and oh my gosh, there's so much literature on this, Aisling, you've probably given people these resources, but when you're turning to each other to solve the problems and find the opportunities, it grows exponentially. And so when you think about what you're taking on, and what you're taking on, for example, is social devaluation or eugenics, the potency of your advocacy strategy has to meet or exceed the potency of what you're up against. So if you're up against something like social devaluation, you need all hands on deck. And it is an exponential kind of thing. It isn't just, what do they say, is greater than the sum of, the parts. Because it just, you're the rocket and the launch pad when you recognize the capacities of collective leadership. And by the way, it's way more fun. We're human beings. We're meant to interact with each other. If you look at all the busyness that happens in the world for people to try to figure out how to be seen and how to connect with other human beings, when you intentionally have a strategy of collective leadership, you're reaching right out to the place. You're using a strategy that is very joyful. And it's built on capacities, and as opposed to what can be kind of a fear-based strategy of, oh my God, look what's happening, and how are we possibly, you could run and think, if I just was faster or smarter, I'd figure this out. Well, no, you don't have to be faster or smarter. You need to pull in other people. Then you have a difference.
Absolutely. And we talk a lot about what are the kind of supports and the resources needed to kind of nurture this lifelong journey of leadership. And I really hear you talking about actually finding the tribe, finding other people who care about that, other people who have a piece of the puzzle. It's not up to you to know everything. It's that difference between self-reliance, where you think you need to do everything by yourself, and self-sufficiency, where you know, this is the bit that I know, and I can ask for help with the other bits. So some of that attitude around sufficiency, not self-reliance, and finding the group of people who are also committed to this work is important. One of the questions that we got ahead of time was also about this idea of mentoring. So we'd love to hear your reflections on how effective is mentoring for growing inclusive leadership, and is mentoring itself a leadership skill that people need to intentionally develop?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's the gift of mentorship can be life-changing. The interesting thing, though, about mentorship is conventional wisdom would say the mentor picks the mentee, the person being mentored. But ultimately, anybody who's been in a wonderful mentoring relationships realize that it's very reciprocal. And almost every mentor who's worth their salt comes to it eventually of saying, oh gosh, I think I got more out of this than I gave. Or you at least recognize the reciprocity when it's happening. So it isn't this top-down over, power over domination, kind of thing. Like there are kind of, again, conventionally, when you think of mentoring, like in your career, someone could be showing you very practical kinds of career ladder things. They could be teaching you concrete skills. They could be introducing you to people or that you may have never otherwise met, or opening doors. That's the joyful part of mentoring. It's a blast, to do that. But the other piece of that is always at some point, and often early, the person being mentored, in that was the expectation, challenges their mentor in a way that frees both of them to become better human beings, that frees you both to experience a much more reciprocal relationship that is not based on an inequity in power. So if you can, and so that's why peer mentorship is so effective, because from the beginning, you're not coming into a relationship with a power discrepancy or perceived power discrepancy that can suck the air out of the room, or at least, kind of maybe inhibit or squash the voice of one of the partners. And in human relationships, like that's a non-starter, right?
Yeah.
So I think if both or many people, it can be more than two people involved, are coming into the relationship saying we both have gifts and insights here to contribute. Even if somebody said, oh, I've been part of the field for 45 years, and you said, well, I'm just coming into this. Maybe just coming into this, you have that great space of not naivete, but a certain, sometimes innocence, or just openness to the possibility that the experts can all be wrong. We wouldn't have had, 60 years of institutionalization of people thinking that that would prepare people for primetime living who weren't ready for primetime living, when none of that was ever true, and in fact caused more harm than good. So some of the great, like best practices are like best practices for whom?
Yeah.
Created by whom, created for whom. And so there's nothing better than someone saying, wait a second, like the Noam Chomsky, like, wait a second, I don't think that's right,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a sweet moment when people find space, or just start from the beginning, creating that space of saying, this is a pure mentoring relationship, because we both have things uniquely to offer to this situation. And it's not about age, and it's not all about experienced. And frankly, if you're an established leader, you could be like, like stuck in your old ideas. or, just, pervious to a breath of fresh air blowing in. So, but mentoring is important. I just saying that some of the beliefs or conventional thinking about what a mentor protege relationship is can be everything from infantilizing to harmful. So I think but I've probably mentored thousands of people, so I'm saying this from experience that it's a joyful thing to be having the humbling and honoring experience of someone inviting you into their life and asking for some help or some wisdom or some insights or some feedback, and that goes both ways. Be prepared to have that go both ways would be my advice. This feels like test our teams. I didn't even know what we were going to talk about, so I apologize if you're like, oh my God, she just shows up and she's like,
no, she shows up and shares so much value with us. One last question from us, Ruby, because funnily enough, then we are moving into peer mentoring time. But one of the questions that we've had has been, who gets to decide who's around the table? Who gets to decide whose insights are missing? And how do you decide who needs to be there?
Wow. Yeah, those are great questions. So, there's kind of different levels that you could answer that. What usually happens and what do you want it to be? So, because we're living in the world we're living in and we're imagining the world we want it to be, I would say if you're an intentional collectivity, you begin by recognizing you're saying, what is the world we want it to be, or what is this venture we want it to be? And who's missing? We always know who's missing. Usually the people who are missing are the people most affected by what's being proposed. So right away you're going, who's most affected by the conversation we're even having? What is it we're intending to do? Who do we think will benefit? And where are they? If they're not at the table, end of conversation. The first order of business, recruit people who have the wisdom of having been subjected to the impact of everybody else's great ideas. So right away, you just honestly, you start with the people that you think are going to be most impacted. You look at the things that have been tried that have really turned out to become the problem they set out to address. And you say, what are the intentional safeguards against that happening? And one great intentional safeguard is to say, of the people who were intended to benefit, let's start the conversation with going, we have this idea that it could be better. What would be better from your perspective? And what could go wrong, even the things that sound like great ideas? And sometimes we invite people in, they don't have to be part of the ongoing group, but you can invite people in who are, kind of well known for having blazed trails around that topic, who can say, here's all the stuff we tried that sounded brilliant that turned out to be terrible. That turned into wild perversions. Some part of the conversation, I always think is some analysis of any good idea can be perverted, right? So I like to include some people who are just really good at kind of thinking through, like, kind of whether the incoherency. You invited Michael, who he's great at this, and someday he'll be here to talk about this. But what are kind of some of the incoherencies or coherencies in this idea, in the early foundation of what we're trying to do? If you said, if the right people are doing the right thing in the right way to produce the intended outcome, what would they be doing? How would they be doing it? What could go wrong? How do you safeguard against that? So some analytical thinkers, but I think the most important thing is to have the people that are most affected by where this might go. Aisling, one of the things I loved about the way you have gone forward is when you had the people who were interested in the topic, you co-created, here's the mission, here are the guiding principles. You do check-ins all the time to go, how are we rolling? Are we really going where we intended to go, or is it are we actually making it worse? Are we wandering around, Arcadia National Park trying to get to Canada and we're stuck in Maine? I mean, from the US, so that might not make sense to everybody here, but yeah, who needs to be involved? And old people and young people together. We've been at these international conferences where things are swirling around, and an Indigenous leader will stand up and say something fundamental like, well, we've always found that the answers to these problems come from turning to each other, taking care of ourselves, taking care of each other, and taking care of the earth, like something elemental. But just, people who ground you.
Absolutely.
Help.
Ruby, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, to leave the other meeting and join us here. We really appreciate you coming in and sharing your reflections and experience with us. So thank you.
So here's the only thing. I violated one of my most fundamental operating principles, and it was because you snatched me out of a meeting and said, hey, we want to hear your thoughts about this. I almost never say anything before I've heard from everybody else. And so just in case that may be more important than anything I said, like seek first to understand, then be understood. I never do what I just did, except for I love Ashley and she asked me to do it, so I did it. But I just role modeled something you should never do, which is give people your opinions before you've heard from them. So I mean, I know Sean and I know Aisling, but I'm just saying that my apologies, my profound apologies that I kind of stepped right in it, didn't hear you first, because that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Ruby. What a great practice to share to end our learning session with. So I'll invite everyone now. We're moving into the peer mentoring time. If you go onto the link that's shared in the chat that I'll share again, you can see what that's all about. If you're not able to join us or that's not of interest to you, that's totally okay. I'll just invite you to drop off now because I'll be setting up breakout rooms. So we would love to have you with us. That's really our connection time, our opportunity to talk about some of these big tricky issues that Ruby was talking about, and whatever the big tricky issue is in your world, in your context. So we'd love you to join there. There's some guidance on the site. And otherwise I'll be available and I can jump in and out as needed.